Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time here for today. We'll give it about another minute or so just to let everyone kind of trickle in, and then we'll get started in a minute or so. Okay. Okay. I think we can get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time again this afternoon, joining us on our April dedicated locator member Q&A session. Just as a reminder that this is an informal session, so we want to encourage everyone here to share your thoughts, your feedbacks, experiences you may have with DL. Also, just a reminder that this session is recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel, just like any other of our previous member Q&A sessions. So if you do want to listen in to previous months' Q&A sessions or our previous month's town hall and such, all that could be found to our Ontario One Call YouTube channel under the dedicated locator. You'll see all those sites. So let's move on to our updates here for the month. So we're just going to go through a bit of an update again for as we do every month. If you've seen this before, we're continuing to update the industry as we go on. As you can see below in the gray line there, illustrates the 2022, the first time the inception of the dedicated locator, which started on May. Just a little after when we received the Royal Ascent and DL was put in place. As we roll into enforcement date, the dedicated locator, 2022 was more of a learning curve year where the numbers were shallow as we help, several broadband projects and different type of projects kind of transition into the new model. And later that year, we started to see a bit more traction as the industry shifts in understanding the requirements surrounding dedicated locator, and more project owners saw that, it fits their needs of further project. So with that ending in 2022 here, now we're going into 2023. We saw, last year we saw the spike in the usage of DL from, notably during the off-peak season where we saw projects who have set their projects in DL utilize the milder winter season, having DL resources readily available, so they start their project much earlier than the conventional start of the dig season. So we saw a trajectory throughout, till we saw a trajectory till we from February, January, February, March, April, we saw the numbers peak up, and then till we hit July, where not only in DL but also the industry wide, we saw a large scale projects scale back or canceling project, which may have been an effect of the interest rate spike, but where there were also a few project owners who were just understanding DL and did not anticipate the benefits and efficiency of DL, where they blew over really their budget for the remainder of the year, whereas some of them completed most of their project that was projected for a full year at a much earlier time into the year. So we saw the numbers a little bit dip down there from starting from July through September, and then we saw that from September on, we saw that a little bit picked up from November and December as new projects and set themselves up under DL. Now, if we look at the green line here, we're looking at 3 months of 2024. It's kind of a bit of a strange start of the year so far. Doing the opposite than what we saw at the start of 2023. Certainly, there's an anomaly in lower ticket volumes that reflects across the board. So not just in the DL side of things, but also in the public side of things, where we've received things the locates that we receive in our system. So this could be related still to interest rate that's still playing a factor in the industry with larger scale project owners who have scaled back with their capital work, and also fewer fiber to home projects happening or starting up this year, which occupies pretty much a large portion of dedicated locator. On a positive note, we also have, we've seen several new project owners that have just started their DL project submission process. So we definitely are looking forward to see more results as we progress through the year. So this one is just kind of going to the overall percentage between dedicated locator and the public stream, and what we have seen and what dedicated locator have taken away from the public stream, right? Similar to the previous slides there, where we started off in 2022, we've seen low amount of percentage wise in terms of DL taken off from the public side of things. Then as we move on to 2022, we saw the same ratio and same rates of the spikes up and down through the numbers that we saw in 2022. Obviously, what we want to focus here is some of the spikes that we've seen, mainly in the beginnings of the year, where under DL we are seeing a lot more locates being submitted through these off-peak seasons, just because they have the resources, taking advantage of those milder weathers, like I said. So between the DL and the public side of things, we're seeing almost a peak of 10% coming off from the public stream and going into the DL side. Essentially, as we progress forward through this, we're seeing that numbers fluctuate up and down, and there's multiple factors to that. Obviously, with dedicated locator, we're seeing an influx of locates being submitted through. As they complete the locate, they just move on to the next side of things, so that kind of fluctuate between the public and the DL side of things. Now, I just want to give you guys an overall update again, once again, for the project owners that are using dedicated locator. Obviously, from the 2022, we've seen 6 project owners, and from 2023, we've seen that bit of a double up from that. So with the amount of project owners that we've seen that came through from 2022, but still predominantly still fiber to telecoms where we're seeing here. Going into 2024, we've seen and we have added 7 more new project owners from last year total. Now we're seeing more sectors submitting projects under the dedicated locator model, where we're seeing more and more municipalities, hydro companies, transit projects, and such, utilizing the dedicated locator model. So definitely the interest is there. We're getting more and more project owners seeing that it fits and reaps the benefits of utilizing dedicated locator for their project to get more efficiencies out of that and getting control of their locates and their scheduling of their projects, obviously. Here we look at, who are the approved active dedicated locate service providers, so DLSPs. Just as we are, as we see more sectors showing interest and looking to utilize the dedicated locator model, the demands for a locate resource expand, and we continue to work diligently with the industry on getting more locators and locate service provider available and approved for dedicated locator. You can see in 2024, we have 4 LSPs that we are working with to get on board currently. But just to be completely transparent through this process, this transition and approvals from infrastructure owners can vary. So, we've seen some take longer to transition as a DLSP and get those approvals. And, with this, we've seen one, and such as Premier Locate, who have removed themselves from the dedicated locator industry this year. But certainly, we're continuing to work with the industry and high-risk infrastructure owners to increase that list of dedicated locate service provider available, and making more available resources out there for projects that are wants to take the reaps of the benefits of dedicated locator. So, and for those who are looking into transitioning as a DLSP, have those conversations now. Understand those requirements. Understand the requirements of the infrastructure owners. That's servicing in those areas and such. Reach out to ourselves, or reach out to our DL team to have these conversations. As we can help and provide that guidance throughout the process, and make those communication reach out to the infrastructure owners within those servicing area. So let's have a look again. What are the key benefits of dedicated locator for you guys here, the underground infrastructure owners? This is really what we want to hammer down in terms of, what are the benefits for as an infrastructure owner of dedicated locator, right? So first thing first, we are looking at reducing the workload on your locators, having to stay in compliant to the public stream load, right? As we know, May 1st is coming into effect, so there's the administrative penalties that considers the factors, and staying in compliance and such. Larger projects are coming through with more demands and such. So having that reduced workload on your locators, stay compliant into the public stream load, having to attend, a locator, having a public locator having to answer to a homeowner locate, to a small project locate, like such as fencing and such, and having to come out to emergencies and such, that really takes a lot from your locator and your own resources. That takes away their efficiency, to provide internal locate. It puts a burden on them to keep, the public load, the project load, emergencies, and with that burden on them, providing accuracy locate hinders that, right? So with dedicated locator, you're translating that heavy workload from that demands from a project to a DLSP now, without worrying to use your own resource onto that. So that's one of the key benefits that we're looking at, as an infrastructure owner, utilizing and buying into the dedicated locator. Here's another one here as well too, is, dedicated locator can assist in mapping. We talked about this in the past, and proactively still speaking about this, and relaying that information across the board here, where we have this data cycle that can utilize under the dedicated locator model, right? That data cycle, obviously, we all start with a mapping. We have some form of a mapping, but now with that form of mapping, we're moving into the locate. Now, with a public load locate, you have public locators locating your infrastructure as it is now, but you're adding on a dedicated locator, or that project also providing you that locate of your infrastructure. So now you have more data on hand. That means you have more locates, that you can take that data on, essentially, which is, you can take that and validate it, and build up your mapping based on the validation. Now, from those locates, you have one coming from the public stream, you have one from the DLSP. That helps you to gather those data, and you can get those requirements from them directly. Validate your mapping, whether or not it's accurate. Great, let's work on, that gives you your confidence that your mapping is where it's at and it's accurate. If it's, if there's some discrepancy on it and whatnot, then let's make those incremental improvements to your mapping, and utilizing, while utilizing DL in this form. Last one here, obviously, we're really looking at reduction in costs. This could be a sensitive topic in some sense, and I've seen that, right? But really, you're looking at, you are reducing your administrative and resource costs in the long run once you use DL, right? Like once you have them all set up. Yes, obviously we understand there's an initial administrative burden on your part to get dedicated locator set up, or get that dedicated locate service provider set up in the project, but it all equates in the long run as you transfer that project load to the DLSP rather than your internal resources. These DLSPs that are coming on board, they are being utilized by other project owners as well too. So really, when you're looking at this, if this is your first time approving that DLSP, or this may be the second time, as you progress through that process, it just gets easier and easier at that point, and less time is taken from there. And that's where we're seeing the reduction of costs, obviously, from your side of administrative burden. Whereas in the public stream, you have your own internal administrative, to get the locates out, to assign locates. Then you have your locate resource going out there to complete the locate. You're eliminating all that under a DL project. So just, although we are 2 years into force of dedicated locator, we understand that there's still multiple roadblocks along the way, that we are constantly working with all stakeholders, different sectors of the industry. We all have common goal here. That common goal is to protect the underground infrastructure, safe excavation, and obviously being able to deliver more infrastructure to serve our communities on time, right? And that's what we're seeing from broadband projects, ensuring that everyone is connected all across Ontario. Now let's look at, the common roadblocks that we see in the industry, that we're currently going through, and what we're seeing while setting up dedicated locator. So first thing first that we're looking at here is contracts, right? Contracts and agreement. Although it's not part of our legislation and requirements, we understand it is best practice to have some sort of a contract or agreement in place with onboarding a DLSP or a project owner, right? And or a project owner. Now, the contract and agreement have proven to be the biggest delay we've experienced during the DL project setup. So we all know that when there are multiple parties and legal team involved, things tends to slow down. We need to be proactive in this. Understand your requirements as an infrastructure owner. Be in the know of the projects coming through your servicing area. You can establish this by having communication with different parts of your organization, right? For example, in the municipality side of things, project owners having to come, to request permitting. On the permitting side of things for municipalities, project owners are coming in there, notifying of the project. They're already requesting requirements for the project to be established within the areas and such like that. That information is there already, so have that built in, perhaps build in something to those earlier stages in permitting to establish if the project will be utilizing dedicated locator, or have those requirements that they should be using a dedicated locator and such. But get those information ahead already to work out these lengthy timelines and contracts and agreements. One of the things that's been common is unlocatable infrastructure. How do we go by this? This is very common that we've seen in terms of delay, right? In liability and such that gets put into contract. Understand what your requirements are into these unlocatable infrastructure. How do you do them now? How is it located now, and what are the factors surrounding to that? Get those requirements now, get those understanding now, and put that into an agreement, or work those out in the earlier stages, so that way when the dedicated locator is registered, you know exactly how to move forward or approach this in that sense. Have a draft agreement in place. Cannot stress this more, but having a draft agreement in place that gives you the foundation to start the conversation. At least once a project gets put in, you're just filling in the blanks at that point within your draft agreement, right? Now we understand, resource wise, and some infrastructure or municipalities that might not be readily available. Reach out to our team. We do have multiple shared draft agreement that was provided by other infrastructure owners or municipalities that are welcome to share their draft agreement, right? This is the purpose for this Q&A now, is to have everyone have that discussion, share your experience and such. So we're more than welcome to share those information with yourself as well too. If you require any draft agreement, reach out to our team. We can have those as well, right? Mainly for municipalities, one thing we look at is the signing delegation. Let's get those sorted out already on time, because we under this legislation, we there is the 10-day time frame. Time frames are there, and are regulated at that point. So we have to ensure that we're meeting those requirements at that point. We have to ensure that you are agreeing on the preferred DLSP within that 10 days. You are providing the mapping that's required within the project setup timeline and such. So let's be proactive on this. Speaking of mapping in terms of that, right? Like, mapping is very important. There's some where mapping is not a par for to be provided or and such. Let's make those improvements, and I'm going to go through the next couple of slides here. We're going to talk about a bit more of mapping, how an infrastructure owner, how you can improve on your mapping. But this is very important, having a mapping on hand now, having accurate mapping for not just for your internal resource to accurately locate your infrastructure, but also for a dedicated locator. This is not just for dedicated locator. This is improvements to your infrastructure going forward, right? Coming down the road, this is going to be a mandate that you have to have accurate mapping in some point, right? So let's get ahead of that as well too. And last one, what we're seeing here is, underground infrastructure owners being non-responsive, right? We're 2 years into dedicated locator. At this point, there is that requirement, the 10-day requirement, saying so as well too. May 1st is coming up, so there's administrative penalty that will come and play into this. But we are also trying to work with everybody here to come across all the roadblocks, and to ensure that everyone maintains that and are in compliant and are working through that 10 business days of your requirement there. So what we need, and the key part, not just through dedicated locator, but our industry, is communication. So let's have that communication. Rather than being responsive, reach out to our team. if you have concerns and such, as soon as you receive that notice, reach out to our team. Have those earlier communication to that project owner if you're aware if that's coming through. Have those earlier conversation to a servicing DLSP if they approach you before they officially submit a project to their project owner. If they approach you, entertain that conversation already, because it'll be all worth it to work those out in the earlier stages. Then when the formal submission comes through, now we have to work with the timelines and the requirements at that point. Now let's look at here. Let's have a look at the importance again. I cannot stress more on mapping, the importance of mapping, and how really it can affect a dedicated locator program. First and foremost, obviously, a safe work site and a safe construction industry starts with accurate locate. With accurate locate starts with really accurate mapping and records. So the locators out there really depends on accurate mapping to validate and complete their locate. Mapping errors can really slow down, construction, where it can cause construction site to shut down until the error can be validated, or the discrepancy between the mapping can be validated. And it can also lead up to, obviously, you know our worst scenario, damages, where we now have a site that can be shut down at a longer period due to a damage that may occur. Now the infrastructure has to go in there, repair those damages and such like that before the project can proceed. As an infrastructure owner, you do not want that burden, especially on those designated broadband project, of slowing down or shutting down their construction due to a mapping error. So let's be proactive on that now and ensure, we have that accurate mapping, we have mapping available. And ultimately, underground infrastructure owner needs to provide that mapping information as part of a legislative requirement, not only through Ontario One Call, but also, the DLSP. So again, who can help? Who can improve mapping? Who can help with you on this section? First and foremost, as an infrastructure owner, each time you put down new infrastructure or expose them, to expose them to maintenance and whatnot, you're working with them. Make sure you are, using the most up to date machines out there, GPS surveying location to produce high quality record. At some point, it's going to be a requirement. Once again, I cannot stress this more. It's going to be a requirement eventually down the road to have most accurate mapping to us, right? Dedicated locator, the dedicated locator service provider, they're out there. They can help you out. Have these conversations with these DLSP coming into your work area there, right? They're working directly on project sites, whereas we see, they see the project from start to finish. So they have full scope of the utilities within the project vicinity day in and day out. They can address those discrepancy changes to the relocated utilities during the project duration, and validate the accuracy of your mapping. So they see that firsthand, where if we're looking at transit project here, right? There's a relocation that occurs before the full transit project occurs. When they utilize the dedicated locator from the start, they already see where those relocations are occurring before you even reach to the infrastructure owner for, the red line of your infrastructure, get it updated with your mapping and such, and get it registered to us. Utilize that information, get that on hand right away from them, so that way you can validate your infrastructure at a much earlier timeline, and address this right away. So I do encourage you as an infrastructure owner to look at it in this perspective, that when a dedicated locator comes through to your area, utilize that to validate your mapping, to work on your accuracy or mapping. Let's make those incremental updates and upgrades on that. And once again, dedicated locator, there is that sense of communication all across the board, right? And this is one thing that we've lacked in the industry in the past, until now. But we should move forward to having this communication across the board between all parties, infrastructure owner, dedicated locator, or locate service provider at that point, and the excavator community, right? Everyone is there for the same purpose of goal of safer excavation, and getting the project on time. And how do we, establish that? We establish that with open communication. So, having that communication relationship between the locator, the excavator, then having that relay back to the infrastructure owner, this can get captivated and value your infrastructure and records all in all towards, to a more accurate mapping, right? They're out there doing the work, they're out there exposing your infrastructure. when they expose the infrastructure out there, have them notify you so you can go out there and capture your infrastructure, whether or not that is through a survey or a GPS, however way to get that mapping improve on your side. So those are things that could help out improve your mapping in that sense. So with that, we're positioning ourselves to a better accurate mapping. Once again, the improved mapping, we're increasing ourselves to increase ourselves to damage prevention and overall just a safer excavation site. And one thing here in my last slide here, I just want to show the importance of our commitment here. It is important to understand your role to this and overall commitment, right? We are 2 years in and we should be in a position to have a global understanding of the benefits and what we're really striving to in our end goal here, not only to DL, but also having improved mapping of your infrastructure for your public side of the load as well too, right? We need your participation for us as an industry to move forward to our own common goal of safe excavation. Let's remove and reduce those obstacles now and work out what we need to prevent and any sort of resistance in the long term, right? Let's work on this together. Now, I'm putting all this information here. Obviously, some of you guys are in business call. We've been working with a lot of the, multiple stakeholders here, but this is just our DL team here. You can see several things that we've offered within our services, several things that we can work with, as yourself as infrastructure owners with DLSPs. We can help with those barriers of communications and such like that. So, I do encourage you at this point to reach over to us, have those earlier conversation with us. And we can include to all the right parties that needs to be involved at this point. Okay, and I'll leave that up there. Any questions from your side here? Anyone want to share their experience with DL? I'll leave the floor open now. Got a bit of a shy crowd here, but why don't we have one of our DL representative, DL team here, Christine, let's go over some of the questions that were commonly asked through the town hall, and we can kind of review that, and from there maybe someone else could share some information from that point in.
We have some questions in the Q&A as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to start with that.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
We have first question, where do we find the requirements to become an approved locator or DLSP?
That's a very good question. Right now on our webpage, if you go under the dedicated under Ontario One Call, and then there's a section there for dedicated locator. That is our main webpage. If you scroll down, you'll see 4 different subcategories. One for infrastructure owners, one for project owner, and there will be one there for dedicated located service provider. If you click on that section there, there is a link that would provide you into the framework that we produce under, for a dedicated located service provider. Now, on our previous conversation, we are constantly working on this framework right now to update it to the most recent industry standards. But what we have there is what we established last year. It still carries most of the foundation in terms of becoming and what are some of the requirements that infrastructure owners are looking for to become a DLSP. And from there, once you have that information, I encourage you once again, reach over to us. Let's have those conversations. We can guide you over to the right, direction that you need to look into.
Thank you, Marco. The second question we have in the Q&A is, what criteria is being used to qualify accurate mapping?
Simple to answer that simply, it is really providing mapping to a third party. Do you feel comfortable to the information you're providing to them to safely locate your infrastructure? Really, that's what you got to ask yourself at that point. The mapping and sense, that is something that you got to work with the dedicated located service provider that's coming on board there, in terms of if they can read it, if it's legible for them, and if they're able to locate your infrastructure with the mapping you provide. Those are the conversations you should have at that point. But really, before you initially even provide that to the dedicated located service provider, is this a mapping accurate enough for my own resource to safely locate my infrastructure. And that's how we can consider accurate mapping.
Thank you. The next question in the Q&A is, how do we agree to a DL inside of 10 days if they receive our agreement within the first 24 hours and haven't signed it at the end of the 10 days?
So that's where we come across with obviously the delays between the contracts and agreement. To answer that simply, agreements and contracts are not part of our legislation, so it is not a requirement directly. Your requirement is to provide an agreement in writing, so that is the form of preferred DLSP form that we provide, that you agree to work with that DLSP. You're moving forward that DLSP with the project owner. That is within that 10 days. That is your main requirement. So if you establish that and work out the agreements and the contract interim, within the timeline of the project setup, so the 90-day setup and such like that, that could be worked out to the time. But your initial main requirement within that 10 days is agreeing on a DLSP with the project owner. And then from there on in, obviously, you work out the contracts and agreements with the mapping itself.
Thank you. We'll move on to some of the mapping frequently asked questions that we have. For sharing mapping, are simplified Excel data extracted from ArcGIS suitable? Do you have any best practice on how to share mapping, and where do we find the information on specific mapping requirements?
So once again, the mapping requirements, that's something that you would work out with the DLSP. So once that's, the notice has been sent out to the dedicated locator project, and the dedicated locator service provider is established, I encourage you to have those communication with them. Obviously everyone have their difference in standards and such, so the DLSP can work with that, and they're the one that essentially at the end of the day would validate that information if it's whether or not legible or safely for them to locate your infrastructure. So in our side of things, yes, there's some resource best practices, and there's obviously there's best practices around where you can find them through CGAs or Common Ground Alliance. But essentially, if you're working with a dedicated local service provider, it's just best to reach over to them, have those communication, right? It's an open communication to whereas what they can work with in terms of your mapping and what would be best for them as well too.
Okay, the next mapping question we have prepared is, if the mapping works for our internal locates, wouldn't this work for the DLSP?
Once again, it goes back to if your internal locate can safely locate your infrastructure and the information that you're providing is legible and such, then yes, I would say that would work with the DLSP. But like I said, it works. At this point, you would have to work with the DLSP, what's legible and what can be validated on their side. If there's additional training that may be required, if it's obviously your internal resources have been doing this for a certain timeline that they're able to identify the infrastructure a lot quicker and validate your mapping, there may be a bit of a training that may be required, or even a walkthrough with the DLSP to ensure that the same best practice that's occurring with your internal resources is shared upon the dedicated located service provider locating your infrastructure as well too.
Thanks, Marco. We have another question that popped up in the chat. If all our locates are completed within 5 days, do we need to help the DL?
So it's not the matter of help the DL. It's a part of our legislation and the act that if you receive a dedicated locator notice, your requirement is to agree with the project owner of the dedicated locator and provide the mapping. So it is a requirement as an infrastructure owner that once a dedicated locator is registered within the area and you are an affected member, you are to agree on a dedicated locator service provider. And short form, yes, you have to fall into that dedicated locator project at that sense, regardless if you meet the 5 days and such.
Thank you, Marco. The next question will be from the contract agreement section of our frequently asked questions. How can underground infrastructure owners with no in-house legal or other resources required to deal with dedicated locator projects best prepare themselves?
So that's a great question. Utilize our team. Our team is very open and in terms of walking you through to what your requirements and such. And if you're looking at the contracts and agreements and in that sense, utilize this platform. Reach over to other similar infrastructure owners, such as yourself, to see if they have a foundation of a draft agreement, right? We have those in place as well too. So we have those shared draft agreements that's been shared upon a DLSP or another infrastructure owner and such like that, that we are given, the go ahead to share that with other infrastructure owners as well too. So at this point, reach over to us, make those connections with us, and we can help you make those connections to get you where you need to.
Great, thank you. The next question about contracts and agreements. Can an underground infrastructure owner insist that a DLSP sign a contract with our stipulations? How does the DLSP agreeing to our contract fit into the 10 business day requirement?
So this is going back again. Understandably, that contracts and agreements, it's a lengthy process and time. And I just want to, lay to remind everyone there once again, it's not part of our legislation and it is not a requirement. The requirement is initially the 10 days. So there could be an interim, and this is where the point is that you can agree on the DLSP or you can agree on the the dedicated locator project initially with the preferred form that we provided you, and kind of through that sense into that form, you are working along with the agreements itself. You're working along and laying out what is required from, yourself or a DLSP, and kind of work that through in between. And if there's, discrepancy and such, get our team involved as early as possible. All right. We can help you. We can help, both parties mediate and what is required and what is, to kind of move forward to this. But essentially, just to short form that answer is that your 10-day requirement is to agree with the project owner on the DLSP, right? Once that's established, these contracts and such, you can work that through the process of the setup period of time. However way you can agree with the project owner or the DLSP for that timeline of the contract. Obviously, we're aiming for the 90 days to ensure the project are set up properly within that timeline. That's the reason why getting these conversation ahead of time and such to prepare yourself so that way you're not put under that 10-day. Let's encourage those earlier conversation. Once again, let's see what other means we can understand if there's a project coming on board and such. And this is not to the infrastructure owners that we're advising this to. This is something that we're advising project owners as well to keep us in the know, prior to formally submitting your projects and such, so that way we can have this information across the board to give a heads up, right? And this is something our team is taking back as well too, as lesson learned from previous experiences, is that there's ways where we can perhaps have these conversations at an earlier point prior to the formal submission, whether or not that is to a platform, similar platform as a Q&A as this, where we're setting up a conversation with the affected members at an earlier time frame before the formal submission, so that we can lay out any information, any questions that may be asked or and such with between all stakeholders involved to that project, and that way we can better prepare ourselves.
Thank you, Marco. The next question we have prepared is, what can the parties do in a situation where an agreement has not been reached?
So with that, it's very similar to what I'm pretty much preaching across the board here, is that the 10-day requirement under subsection 7.7 must be completed, and that is really 7A is agreeing in writing of the with the project owner and the infrastructure owner of the DLSP. And then B obviously is moving forward with the mapping. That is your main requirement. At this point, the locate agreement, it's not required under the act. So that's something that could be worked towards on the side. So communication communication is key on this, and I cannot stress that more. Build a process, build a procedure at an earlier point to ease the transition. Work together to confirm each party's requirements. Understand what your requirement is to start off with. Understand what the DLSP's requirement is at that point, and then kind of let's work together onto that to come down to an agreement, get us involved at that point.
You. Next question is there a detailed document to help underground infrastructure owners work through the process once they have been contacted by a DLSP?
Very good question. Now we do have under the infrastructure owner section of our web page, there is a recommended best practice. So that's a good starting point as always. And once again, reach out to us, get our team involved. We can help you with the guideway on that one. We can help you open up those communication, and get more specific information at that point as well too.
Thanks, Marco. Here's another one you touched on earlier. I'll ask it again. It's one of our prepared questions. What about infrastructure without a tracer wire? How can we properly set up a DLSP to locate our unlocatable infrastructure?
Okay, and that's something I did touch point on our presentation. So, provide existing records and discuss an option with the DLSP. We all know there are infrastructure that are unlocatable. How is your own resources locating that in that sense right now? With that, if it is being located at the to where it is now, are we able to validate that data of the locate to the existing record that we have on hand? Once again, going back to presentation there, how are we doing the data like a cycle of that information for we have the existing record to where it's being located as is right now to validating that infrastructure and making those incremental mapping improvements, right? So once again, let's utilize the existing record. Let's configure that, have those discussions with DLSP, how they can go by it, how you can go, what's best and comfortable for your side of things to work that out. Create a process, create a procedural, a manual or a training for these type of things. Put that into your agreement then, or put that into your training with the DLSP onboarding, right? So are we marking it by measurements? Are we, should there be an on-site visit between the infrastructure owner and the DLSP for a situation or certain infrastructure that are not locatable? Look at the areas at this point, maybe perhaps the project, obviously certain projects, they are coming in there with preliminary information that they require, so they are using and utilizing resources to use hydrovacs and SUE investigation of those infrastructure. Obviously, let's utilize that information, get that back from the project owner, work that communication out so you can get that information so we can translate that mapping from a quality, for a poor quality mapping to a quality B or to a quality A type of information, right? And get that on board. So let's make those incremental mapping and changes.
Great, thank you. The next question is it a decision to use DL for projects or a legal requirement now?
That's a very good question. So we can look at it both ways, right? In this point, at some sectors, you may seem like you're being forced into it. There is a lot of benefits into utilizing dedicated locator. More and more, the ministry and more of the industry is realizing the reaps of benefits of dedicated locator. Therefore, more and more projects are utilizing that in that sense, where they're able to utilize dedicated locator coming across. What is the benefits of that to underground infrastructure is you're really taking away that load. You're taking away those large scale projects away from your sectors. If you're a small municipality, or if you have a small infrastructure owner, and you have several fiber to home projects coming into your area, trying to blitz through your area, that load of locates that being submitted not by just one, but two or three or multiple subcontractors working under that umbrella or that same forecast of work scope can take a lot of burden on your side of things. And once again, you do have either that 5 business days or 10 business days, but there's administrative penalties that are coming across. So staying compliant will be really looked into at that point to you providing those locates on time. These projects takes a lot of demand in terms of locates, not just the initial locates, but the relocates following forward to that as well. So that's where you have to look at the benefits in that sense, not just in the short term. Look at it in the long run. Whereas you can translate all that large scale locates to a dedicated locator rather than your own resource. Obviously your own resource. You're attending to a public locator, whereas there is emergencies, there is regular homeowners, there are small business owners, then you have the large scale project. You're having that one locator travel from point A, B, C, E, all across your town there. Are we really utilizing their time to provide you that locator where they're jumping all over? Half of their time is traveling because they're going to one place to another. That's resource coming out of your own pocket and such. Now, as that locator, we're having that all burden to attend to all these locates. Now you're starting to see the efficiency decrease from that locator. The accuracy is starting to decrease from that locator due to the heavy workload and burden you're putting onto that one locator or to your internal locator resource to meet all the demand. With dedicated locator, they're taking that away and putting that onto theirs. Your initial burden in there is ensuring that the dedicated locator is up and running to safely locate your infrastructure. From there on, in the long term, they're able to take that load from you.
Thank you, Marco. The last question we have prepared is some parties have expressed frustration with reluctant participants. This could be infrastructure owners, project owners, excavators, or DLSPs. What advice would you give to these reluctant parties?
I would say the best thing I can give on this one is open communication. Um, this is something our industry lack, and I speak of this. Let's have that transparency across the board. Have that open communication. If that is not established from the get-go, we're not moving anywhere else. So perhaps get us involved first, then involve the DL team. Then from there on, we can have this communication across the board, whoever needs to be involved, to a collective party, so we can have this open communication across the board, right? Let's active participate in discussion such as this. You guys are taking your time right now, this time of the day, to understand DL, to understand the feedbacks, to understand what's happening to the industry. These are all common shared concerns, and we're all trying to seek solution to this and aligning the industry, obviously to a goal of a safe and accurate locates, right? And also producing projects on time. Let's leverage the experience that we have now, as our team, as a DLSP, as an underground infrastructure and a project owners, what we've gone through this process. And this is something, in a monthly basis now, we'll provide different sectors and key topics that we will have in these Q&As, so that way we can share these feedback, we can share some experiences across the board, and move ourselves towards obviously the end goal is providing that safer excavation, providing locates at a timely manner. We are delivering locates at new standards at this point, right? So let's all utilize that.
So that was all we had for the prepared questions, Marco.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. You do have, I did see it, and these are really great questions, and I would say this is probably the most involved group and question asked through the process, and I do appreciate considering that it's April, it's Dig Safe month, so I know many of you here that been to several conversation and several presentations already through this Dig Safe month that we have. So taking this time today, I do truly appreciate that. Stay tuned again. Once again, we have this on a monthly basis. We try to keep it towards the end of the month. Join us in the following month. We will have different topics as well to reach over to our team. Have these conversations ahead of time. Let's have these open communication. Let's sort out these errors and breakdowns in terms of timelines and such, and let's move forward to dedicated locator and moving forward to an industry with safer locates. I believe there's another question that was put on the board here. Christine, do you want to just check that?
Yes. So we have, is there a law that we have to agree to use the dedicated locators? If the answer is no, then there is no legal requirement to agree to use the dedicated locator. How do we opt out?
So the law is, or the act does say you have to agree on a dedicated locator. Now, the stipulation there is if you don't agree on that particular dedicated locator service provider, that goes back to yourself and the project owner, where you must come into an agreement of a dedicated locator for that project. The option of opting out is not an option. It is between yourself as underground infrastructure owner and the project owner to work with to what dedicated located service provider you can both agree on. So it's not just on the member or the infrastructure owner, but it's also to the project owner. So that's something between the project owner and the infrastructure owner to work with within that, obviously the time frame that's stipulated on the legislation. So once again, if there's the case of that, earlier conversation, earlier communication would be key to understand, the process, or you may have a valid reason why there's the option for that DLSP is not an option for you. Get that information right away across the board to us, to the project owner, so we can sort that out within the proper appropriate timeline. Okay, once again, I do appreciate everyone's questions here. I'm going to end off our time here today. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us. It is in front of you here, deal@ontarioonecall.ca. If you have any more further questions or concerns and issue or feedback, share that with us. Give us a shout. Visit our webpage for any resources. But at this point, I do appreciate your time again, and thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Marco.